to the polls.
We vote, we win.
And to encourage people to come out and vote.
We vote, we win.
It's the last day of early voting in the swing state of Georgia.
How can you vote? How can you vote?
And God forbid if you haven't cast your ballot yet.
Let's vote, let's vote, let's vote.
Deborah Scott and her legion of volunteers are out in force, microphone at the ready, and they're not shy of using it.
What you want to say to the people to get out and vote?
Get out and vote now.
We're in Atlanta, the most populous city in a state that will be critical in deciding the balance of power in tomorrow's midterm elections.
Your vote matters, your vote matters, your vote matters. Let's go.
And they're not just here for a party. Across the road, a polling station. New voting restrictions forced through by Republicans in Georgia after the 2020 election saw polling stations shut down, ID requirements tightened, and a ban on handing out food and drink to voters in now longer lines and often searing heat. And why on earth would they want to stop you giving out food and water to people who are standing in line to exercise their democratic right to vote?
You know, voter suppression comes in many forms. And so one way to discourage voters is try to make it harder for them. So if you only have a few polling locations open, if you only have a few poll workers, and then you put other restrictions to make sure it's a long line, then you know people will get discouraged. The counterbalance is we're going to come out anyway.
So these stalls are strategically placed just outside the minimum legal distance allowed, handing out food and water to people before they join the line to vote.
My people were denied the right to vote in this country for so long, and there's so many policies and laws that are in place right now that are actively working against people like me voting, and so I stand in this line for 3 more hours if I had to.
There's a long way to go. Why is it so important to you?
Because it's important for the future of these people that are here. I mean, one day we're going to die, so we want to secure democracy for all of these other people.
As Americans, we often take democracy for granted. I think the people who can no longer win democratically, they think that young people take it for granted and they want to exploit that, which is why it's so good to see all these young people out here today.
Have you made the Warnock-Herschel decision?
Should I say? I don't know.
You can whisper. She's whispering the name of Reverend Raphael Warnock, the Democratic senator for Georgia, who many thought would easily win re-election next week, but who's now in a neck-and-neck race against the former American football star Herschel Walker, a man with no political experience, but perhaps the thing that matters most, an endorsement from Donald Trump.
We stay together as a team, we'll win a championship.
And a little help from his fans. Walker's rally here on the very day his former team, the Georgia Bulldogs, was set to compete in the biggest college football game of the year.
If you want a photo with Herschel, form a line right here.
Walker's campaigned on family values and banning abortion, but then surfaced embarrassing allegations that he'd urged 2 women to have the procedure. He denies it and evidently didn't want to discuss it when we saw him. Mr. Walker, do you have what it takes to beat Reverend Warnock? What would you say to those who call you a hypocrite? Are you running a truthful campaign? What better opportunity for Walker and the Republicans to stir up nostalgia and hopefully votes for the most famous bulldog of them all? Go Dogs! Thousands of fans gathered for game day, all rooting for the Dogs, but not necessarily for Walker. Game day today, obviously a big part of Herschel Walker's history. Are you supporting him as a senator, though?
No, I've already voted early for Warnock. I'm for women's rights, and I'm worried about what they'll be doing for women in this country.
Go, Georgia Bulldogs!
Oh, I don't think you need political experience. I think you need a basic level of intellect. Guys like Walker shouldn't even be running.
Many would say he's been proven to be a hypocrite, and yet it doesn't seem to have harmed his campaign.
They're all hypocrites. I mean, come on. You know, when President Trump's whole grab the you-know-what came out, we all thought he was finished. Somehow he won.
So none of the stories about Herschel Walker, family values, alleged abortions, none of that bothers you?
No. He did have some struggles, and I think he's gotten help. So I think now he's good to go.
Go down!
He's your man.
He's my man. I'm gonna run with Herschel. Fires to the end zone. Touchdown. 6 more points for Georgia.
Republicans are betting on the fact that their team will run with candidates like Herschel Walker on Tuesday, regardless of their past or connection to Donald Trump. It's inflation and crime that matter. While the Democrats want these same voters to believe that their civil rights and democracy itself is on the line. A line that curled round the polling station until after dark. Each person in the knowledge that their vote matters perhaps now more than ever before.
Well, it's hard to think of a state that more embodies all that's at stake in tomorrow's midterm elections than right here in Georgia. It's the birthplace of the civil rights movement, yet the place where politicians are cracking down hardest on voting rights. It was pivotal in handing the keys to Joe Biden for the White House in 2020, and it was the state where 2 Democratic senators also handed control of the Senate to Joe Biden. But if Herschel Walker wins here tomorrow, it could become the state that hands back control of the Senate to the Republicans. And if that happens, if the Republicans take the Senate and, as is widely expected, the House too, then Joe Biden essentially becomes a lame duck president, sitting on top of a Congress that is controlled by a Republican Party that is itself controlled by the not so invisible hand of one man, Donald Trump.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. Well, here in Florida, the political landscape is dominated by 2 figures. One of them is the state's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, whose combative right-wing rhetoric has won him the love of the Republican base. The other, though, is the man who's made this state his home, the one just mentioned by Siobhan, whose shadow looms large over these parts. Now, Donald Trump has refused to endorse DeSantis for anything other than the governorship, vexed, it seems, by the latter's presidential ambitions. If DeSantis wins tomorrow, it could set the 2 men on a collision course that will dominate the next 2 years.
Welcome to a parallel but very real universe in which Donald Trump, the 3D version, is still convinced that he won the last election, as are millions of his followers who are expecting him to run again.
You know, I think he's just coming back because the people want him back. I mean, if there wasn't a crowd like this supporting him, I think that, you know, he'd probably support another candidate, but we're calling for him to come back.
Pulling the crowds, isn't he?
Yeah, he sure is.
We're here for the enthusiasm, and we need him more than ever in this country. We're in desperate need of just really, it's just normalcy.
Normalcy for the majority of Republicans, lunacy for the rest of the country and much of the world. If Trump behaves like a man who holds his party hostage, that's because it's true.
I ran twice, I won twice, and I did much better the second time than I did the first. And now, in order to make our country successful, safe, and glorious, I will probably have to do it again, but stay tuned.
Power has cast a spell on Trump, and Trump continues to cast a spell on his followers. But Florida also makes Republicans think and doubt.
It's great to be here in my home state of Florida. This is my home state.
Yes, Trump now lives here, up the coast in Mar-a-Lago, and yes, Florida is a must-have state for any presidential hopeful. But here's the rub for Trump. He may be the sorcerer, but his apprentice is the governor of the state. Trump helped him win 4 years ago, but now Ron DeSantis has an even more powerful patron.
And on the 8th day, God looked down on his planned paradise and said, I need a protector. So God made a fighter.
The man who counts on God can no longer count on Trump, as both eye the White House.
Let's see, there it is, Trump at 71, Ron DeSanctimonious at 10%.
Ron DeSantis makes Trump feel threatened, And back at the rally, Republicans are conflicted.
Is Trump going to run again?
That's a good question.
You want him to?
I want to win is what I want to do.
Ah, so you could be a DeSantis man.
I like Ron DeSantis.
Right.
I do.
Are you more of a DeSantis man than a Trump man?
It's a toss-up.
And what about DeSantis, the governor here? People really like him as well.
I love him. We love him. We need him in Florida.
But he wants to be president too, right?
Well, you never know.
So you'd be okay with DeSantis beating Trump in the primaries?
Oh, no, it's so hard. It's a hard decision, but...
A hard decision?
Yes.
Trump and DeSantis are like giant cruise ships in Miami Harbor, big beasts vying for space.
Both Trump and DeSantis are popular.
Joe Budd is running for Congress, and in a church in northern Miami, he confessed his fear.
I hope DeSantis decides maybe not to run against him if Trump decides to run.
So it could be civil war in the Republican
movement.
movement.
Civil war in a primary if DeSantis decides to run against Trump.
Joe Budd has now put on his campaign T-shirt and has joined a march for the black vote in his neighborhood. He does want to win next Tuesday, but it's not lost on the marchers here that he's one of the 300 or so Republican candidates who believe that the last presidential election was stolen.
What do you say to him?
I have nothing to say to him other than we're going to continue to fight for the rights of all people, to make sure that our voices are heard and that our community get out and exercise their right to vote.
What's at stake in these midterm elections for you?
Everything. Just like my shirt says, vote like my life depends on it, because it does. I think our democracy right now is on the table. Yeah. It's in jeopardy.
Yes, we can has become no, you won't. No wonder the campaign is littered with the ghosts of presidents past.
Democracy itself is on the ballot. The stakes are high.
Barack Obama, who served 2 terms. Bill Clinton last night, also re-elected.
That everything I worked for all my life is on the line now.
And Trump, who just can't bear being left out and will do whatever it takes to get back in.
Well, earlier I spoke to Congressman Byron Donalds, the Republican representatives for the 19th district here in Florida, and I asked him what his party will do if they do indeed take over control of the House of Representatives.
The first thing that we're going to do is, first and foremost, is make sure we actually hold this administration accountable. There's so many things that have gone so wrong. We're having issues with diesel supply in the United States, obviously with energy independence, where you have the president calling the Venezuelans for oil. We should not be doing any of that. We really need to dig in and understand why things have gone so wrong in our economy. Number 2, we actually need to clean up some of the excess spending that the Democrats have brought the last 2 years. That has to come out, because we cannot continue to spend and live beyond our means. It only makes inflation worse. And number 3 is that we do have to make sure we're securing the southern border. Fentanyl is the #1 killer in the United States for people between the ages of 18 and 45. And we know that fentanyl is coming across our southern border in record numbers because the administration has not done the necessary work of securing the southern border.
What about arms shipments to Ukraine?
What a lot of Americans want to see is that if we're going to be supportive of Ukraine, that's one thing, but we have to make sure we're securing our southern border.
So in terms of all the things that President Biden has done and might still want to do, let's be clear, from what you're saying, it sounds as if you want to put a stop to all of it.
Well, what's worked? None of it's worked here in America. I mean, pick a topic. It's worse under Joe Biden. So if the cure for what is ailing America is a reversal of his policies and his agenda, then so be it. It's not my fault. I didn't tell them to spend recklessly. I didn't tell them to unsecure the southern border. I didn't tell them to create a labor shortage. I didn't tell them to put their boot on the neck of American energy. They chose to do that. We've seen the results here in America.
Do you think that you're in danger of having a civil war between DeSantis and Trump in your party?
No, absolutely not. We're not in danger of that. The one thing, in the Republican Party is if there's a spirited contest, there's going to be one. And what's going to happen at the end of that is the winner's going to go on and lead our party and go ahead and lead the country, in my opinion, because I think Americans want a change at the top as well. It's not going to stop here tomorrow night in the United States. But between President Trump, you got to understand and must acknowledge that under his leadership, the United States was really cooking with gas. We were doing phenomenally here and abroad.
So are you one of those 300 or so Republican candidates who still believe that the last presidential election was stolen from Donald Trump?
I definitely believe that there were serious issues about the 2020 elections. You only need to look no further than what you have some courts now coming out and saying that the election procedures that happened in the 2020 election were wrong and should never have happened. You have several courts now coming out and saying that. And the simple premise is you do not get to change election procedures in the United States at the last minute simply because of a national emergency or because of COVID-19 or whatever the case might be. Election law is actually set by state legislatures, not by courts, not by local election officials. People have to follow the election law on the books. They don't get to rewrite the election law because the current situation on the ground gives them the ability to do so. That's what went wrong in 2020, and I think you're going to see changes to that, not just in this election cycle, but in the cycles to come.
I mean, the whole world was shocked by the events on January the 6th last year, the storming of Capitol Hill. Is that something you wish to condemn on this program?
I condemned it the day it happened. I've always been clear about that. Nobody is allowed to breach a federal building. Nobody. What happened on January 6th was wrong, and people need to be held accountable, and people are being held accountable. The thing that has been concerning to a lot of Americans has been the fact that the Department of Justice has detained people for extended periods of time without actually filing charges. That's a violation of their Fifth Amendment constitutional protections. Specifically to President Trump didn't egg people on. He asked them to protest peacefully. That was in his speech.
There were people in his administration, there were members of his own family who were begging him to intervene sooner, to call a stop to the raid on Capitol Hill, and he didn't.
The president called people to go home. He said that in a tweet. He put that out there. He called for National Guard troops to be at the Capitol. That is a fact as a congressional committee fact, happened in the Oversight Committee last year, where members of his administration testified to that fact. When January 6th happened, that was terrible for our country. Nobody wants to see it. Nobody wants to see it going forward. It was an awful, awful day.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Byron Donalds, thank you very much indeed.
Of course, anytime.